All right, so now we have a panel of journalists because I don't want you to just hear from me. I want to hear from people who are actually in the field reporting and telling stories. So we have Deepa Barath here, is a religion pro, and she's also on the board of Religion News Association and a member of the Associated Church Press Global Religion team. We have Jaime Morgan Muñoz, who's with PBS, KCET, PBS SoCal. And I've got to call out Soraya, who's on the Community Ambassadors Board, who was able to introduce us to Jaime. And finally, Yusra Farzan is with LAist KPCC.
I know,
multiple,
I still said KPCC.
LAist SoCal Public Radio. So we have a radio, television, and print, online, everything reporter. So I wanted them to introduce themselves a little bit more fully by telling just a story that they have reported recently that they've found particularly compelling.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. Thank you all for being here. As Megan said, I'm with the AP Global Religion team. We are about 11 people. We are a grant-funded team within the Associated Press. And we cover religion exclusively, and that is, I'm very grateful to be doing this. For many, many years, I was with the Southern California News Group and the Orange County Register here locally, doing a lot of local news. I remember speaking with you, Najuma, once during COVID, doing a story about death rituals during COVID. And so I started at the AP in 2022. And since then, I've done a variety of stories. Most recently, the one I really enjoyed doing most recently was a story about religion and Superman, which was comic. We're doing a series about religion and comics. So the hook is the Superman movie that's coming out in July, and Superman's religious and moral roots. And so that I had a lot of fun doing that one. On another note, I also wrote a story about, I've been covering how congregations have been affected by the fires here in LA. So I spoke with the synagogue in the Altadena area. I spoke with members of a mosque in Altadena as well. And on Good Friday, I spent some time with the congregation, the United Methodist congregation in the Palisades. They did a crosswalk down the block all the way to the Bluffs, which ended in the Bluffs, and it was extremely poignant and moving. And so these are stories recently. And one more I would add is an immigration story about the Latino evangelical congregations in Miami, in Florida area, where more than half of one particular denomination, the pastors don't have documents, so they're in danger of deportation, and so they do their services with doors closed because they don't know if ICE is going to bust in on their Sunday services. So these are some of the stories I've been working on recently, but we can talk more about it.
So my name is Jaime Morgan Muñoz. I've been at PBS SoCal for the last 6 years. I'm a producer, so my focus is more on documentaries for broadcast, and then lately now helping build original digital content. I'm trying to think of I think one that speaks more to the subjects that we'll be talking to today. I did a feature-length documentary a few years ago called City Rising, Youth and Democracy, which was about young people across the state of California who were forming their own organizations, looking for ways to essentially empower their communities, shift policy, shift ways of thinking, and I was very compelled by that, especially like getting to see that like there is still interest, there's still excitement across, no matter what the landscape of media and attention and human beings look like. Is kind of compelling to see young people are interested in their future, are interested in the future of their communities. And then just a fun piece we did very recently that I was very proud of. We did a series on a Getty's art initiative called PST. And we did one particularly on an artist who turns trees into satellite detection devices so she can catch Elon Musk's satellites as they're coming across us. And then she makes music with it. So it's kind of compelling. That one's more the fun, lighter side of things.
Hey everybody, my name is Yusra Farzan. I'm a reporter at LAist KPCC. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming out. So I'm a general assignment reporter. That means I can write about pretty much anything and everything. One day it could be Jackie and Shadow in Big Bear, to, I covered sort of Southern California's reactions to the Pope's passing. I was at the Orange County Register before as well. So one of my primary focuses under the general assignment beat is Orange County. I think it's very undercovered and sort of very misunderstood. So I love sort of digging around over there. Some of my favorite stories that I've done recently, I did a story about Ramadan and nightlife. I think when people think of the holy month, they always sort of focus on the fasting aspect, and that's kind of what you see always in the media. But then there's also like this beautiful like community experience during Ramadan where, the community comes together at night for special prayers. There are all these festivals organized around food and just meeting people, and you get to see people that you typically don't see across the year just during Ramadan. And then, so Egypt is sort of regarded as like the Hollywood of the MENA region. And they specifically released TV shows during the Holy Month. And again, it's not something that you really think about. So I got to cover all those aspects. And then another story that I did was again related to the wildfires. I love community-centered stories, just stories about ordinary people who are really like impacting people's lives that you don't really hear about, and I love getting to spotlight those. There was a mail carrier in Altadena who lost his home, but he served this one neighborhood in Pasadena for about 35 years, and I got to tell his story, and just how everybody in his neighborhood was rallying, behind him to help him rebuild. I think people need to sort of hear these stories because we're sort of always inundated with doom and gloom, and rightfully so. Sometimes you like those stories need space in the media as well, but I also think stories of joy and stories of community are also really important, and so I feel very grateful to be able to tell those stories as well.
So we've talked about as a group how both preachers and journalists and media are all storytellers, but in a different way. So I wanted to hear particularly from your medium, what makes for a good story, what makes for a compelling story in your medium?
Do you want me to say?
Sure.
Okay. So with radio, it depends on the type of story, right? Like for a lot of times, we can do an interview for about 15 to 30 minutes, but it's only a 10-second clip that ends up in air. So it needs to be a really punchy quote that really captures the story really well. So when I covered the Pope Francis and how Southern California was reacting to it, I spoke to a bunch of people, but everybody sort of gave me very verbose and very PR, quotes, which, of course, they're trying to really like capture what Pope Francis meant to them. And then I listened to the special mass that the Archbishop had, and he simply just said, I will miss him big time. And we were like, that's it, that's the quote. Because that really captures, something very personal. It really tells the story, the personal story, and it just was a great soundbite. So that was sort of what ended up on the news. And then if it's like a longer story that we have, time for, it's stories where people are just very true and authentically themselves. Like at the mail carrier story, I just followed him around as he was doing his job that day. And it was just really like the sounds that made it on air was him interacting with, people like the way he would every day. And I think it's, it's like really, I think a lot of times people think they need to sort of put on this persona when they come talk to the media. And honestly, the best stories are just when you're completely yourself. Like, imagine the mic is not there. Imagine, the camera is not there, and how you would, usually talk to your congregation or talk to your community. I think, and with the mail carrier, so like he was so nervous. He's like, oh my God, like I've never done this. And I was like, we're just gonna go about your day. And you can see, it was so sound rich, like how he's interacting with the security guard who's asking him about his home, and how he's interacting with his neighbors who haven't seen him, for 2 weeks since the fires. And then there was this one line that he said, and we sort of ended on that. Again, he was just describing his, his route that he's taken for the last 35 years. He's like, every day after I finish work, I make a left to go home, but now I have to go right because of the temporary location. But one day I'll go left again. And I think it was just that, you know. He was just talking about his everyday experience, and it's, you know, you wouldn't think to like talk about things like that, like your route home, but that was what made it to the radio feature.
Yeah, I think there's like a shifting of brains depending on the medium. I think you have to, on broadcasts, when I do like a long form broadcast documentary, I already know, I'm already promising folks that I'm going to take them on this journey, and people have sat down, they're going to probably sit down and watch. When it comes more to the digital side of things, that happens at like hyperspeed. You are competing against millions of different people with different interests, and this is going to sound pithy, and I'm not being facetious, but sometimes like a Mr. Beast style like face thumbnail, like what Joshua Tree and Tree is a satellite detector, like that is the catch. That's how you grab people's attention. And then when it comes to the stories themselves, it's essentially at PBS and the work that we do, a lot of it is based on like knowing that your audiences are intelligent, curious, like interested and engaged, and like it's promising them that this is going to satisfy that curiosity, and that you're going to take them on a journey in something that you have to promise at the very top, like as you said, it's similar radio, and like those first 10 seconds are all you have to catch someone's attention, to get them to make the promise of what the story you're going to tell, and then sort of get us through the journey. It can be, and you know, I've done some pretty dry stuff, like does carbon tax, work, and actually people are open to it. People are open to a series, like a multitude of things, and there's an audience out there for a multitude of things. It's just a question of framing it for folks to know what they're going to get themselves into from the top.
I just made a few notes because I turned 50 and I realized I don't remember anything. So, I think a good story is one that generates public interest. It enlightens us about faith, how faith is practiced in public life. It appeals to people's emotions, what we call human interest stories. And the one I'm really going to focus on is stories that bring us joy and wonder. Yusra mentioned that our team is big on that at the AP. And the reason is, we do live in dark times, and people get fatigued. At some point, there's a lot of whiplash with the news, and people are looking for these spots of joy and wonder. And I was listening in on the conversation earlier, and I think that was very helpful, because I often heard this term, being referred to as the media is always weird for me. I remember once, I went to a press conference, and they were like, I was the only one there, and they were like, oh, the media is here. And I'm like, where? Because I always think of myself as a reporter. I'm a storyteller. I'm not the media. And I still believe that deep in here. So I think we have a shared humanity, and that's always there. And it's a good thing to remember, like when you talk to a reporter, is we are both human beings, and we appreciate the same things. We want the same things. We want to be happy. We want to have peace in our lives. And so some of the stories that we've done recently, which I think are great illustrations of this point. We did one of my colleagues, Giovanna, who's based in Minnesota, she wrote a story about Muslim women who go on outdoor adventures. They went snow tubing in Minnesota. This bunch of women in hijabs, like snow tubing. That was an amazing image, and that story did really well, and it created a lot of goodwill as well, and made a lot of people happy, including us. So there was that, and then I think also a lot of stories that illustrate how communities come together. I've always enjoyed telling those stories. For example, here in Orange County, after the Black Lives Matter movement started, there was a move among Asian and African American faith communities to come together. And I really enjoyed telling that story, because because not only was it like a, it was not like a Pollyanna-ish, let's come together kind of story, but it was like people were talking about their pain. They were like talking about really uncomfortable stuff that happened in LA, the history of that pain in the city during the Rodney King riots, and everything came to the surface. And I think, as a religion reporter, the thing that I really tried to do is to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's really helped me, go to those spaces where, it's not really fun to be, but also, find the fun there. Like I wrote a story about the swastika and its significance to people who come from Eastern religions, like myself, Hinduism and Buddhism, and how that symbol has been hijacked, right? Literally. And, we still, I had the swastika symbol on my wedding invitation. I got married in India, so that's like pretty common. But here in the West, it's like a completely different, I have family members who will not put a swastika pattern outside because they recognize that it could be really offensive to others and could bring up trauma. And so stories like that are what give me a lot of fulfillment, to be honest. So you don't shy away from the controversial. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. But at the same time, there's no need to avoid joy in our lives, I think.
I want to make sure you guys get a chance to ask questions, but I'm going to ask you guys to just share a little bit of like when you reach out to a source, what you find most helpful, and how everyone in the room could be a good source for you, basically. And also wondering about typical turnaround. And I know there's a lot of different types. I don't know if any of you cover breaking news.
I do breaking news as well.
You do breaking news?
A little bit of everything. And I think it's also just understanding that like media organizations have just shrunk, right, in the last few years. We're all doing so much. So just seeing a journalist as a partner, a reporter as a partner in telling the story, I think that's very helpful. So sometimes my turnaround could be a bunch of hours. So it could be like when Pope Francis passed away, I had to turn that around by noon of that day. I typically start work at 7 a.m. So I had 5 hours to report, file radio as well as digital deliverables, and also understanding that we're doing different mediums. What I find very helpful is when people sort of also like work with me. So sometimes, it'll be like, oh my God, like we need time, we need to prepare talking points. They want their comms person on the call. And it just gets so messy then. It doesn't feel very authentic, and that comes through in interviews. So just, really sort of talking to a reporter as you would a person from your congregation or a community member. Just being very authentic and sort of staying true to who you are. One thing I've noticed when I make calls, because some people are like, they get anxious about being on the radio, and I can tell when they're reading from a script. Throw away the paper. Tell me as if how I sometimes tell people, I'm like, if you're trying to explain a concept that people are not going to understand, the average reader doesn't care if you say a gazillion times. They just want something explained to them in really simple terms. So I'm like, just explain it to me as if you were explaining it to your grandmother. That helps me as well, because I sometimes tend to be very verbose in my writing. So I'm like, it also helps me like really condense. And then just working with our deadlines. It's just because when sometimes when you say, like when I call somebody and I'm like, oh my God, I need to turn this around by like 12 noon. They're like, well, sorry, you should have given us a lot more lead time. But just understanding with breaking news, some stories we don't have that lead time ourselves. But some stories, yes. Like I'm working on a story right now. It's the fall of Saigon, Little Saigon, the 50th anniversary on Wednesday, and I'm working on a story about how second-generation Vietnamese Americans feel about Black Friday, because obviously their sentiments would be very different to people who came here as refugees. That I have a lot more lead time. I can sort of really work with people. I'm speaking to somebody at 7 p.m. today, off work hours, but I will work with their schedule. So I think really just being understanding and very cognizant of that really helps.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I operate in a very different timeline. Mine is more like, have patience with us. And I'm so sorry that we're winding not putting you in front of the camera. But yeah, our turnaround time can be as much as like, can we show up to your house tomorrow to film, to organization to film, to as long as like, how's your next 3 months look like? How's it gonna end? I have a little bit of the privilege of having that little bit of extra time, just that because I get more time with my stories and I get to, like, video takes a little more weight, although now with phones and everything, we are also switching to like the TikTok version of this where it is effectively breaking news on certain days, you know. But for me, I think, yeah, thinking about, I'm very communicative with what we need from folks. Like, I'm usually try to be like, hey, this is the angle of the story, this is how we're doing it, like, are you comfortable with talking to us about it? And I think that opens up quite a lot. I think the other thing that helps me is when people feel like collaborators, when they can feel like, hey, actually, I know somebody who can actually speak more to this than I can. I know, like, the sort of handing off to other members of the community, other experts, that sort of thing, is helps us enrich the story a lot more than folks might realize. And then having a chorus of voices is usually particularly helpful in that side of things. And I try my very best, you know, to learn as much as possible of the subject that I'm covering. But you all know more than we do in the end, and we're like, you know, we're human beings. We're trapped in sort of in my own ignorance, and yeah, being able to teach us as we're asking you is, I think, a very important aspect of that, at least enriching for me.
Yeah, I think the best sources I have always respond promptly, whether they can participate or not. At least they let me know, you know, hey, I can't do this, or I won't do this sometimes, right? They don't want to participate, and that's perfectly fine, but they let me know right away. And, you know, I would urge you to please ask about the reporter's deadline, even if they forget to tell you or don't tell you, so that way you have an idea of when you need to get back to them by. And then also ask the reporter if their article has a specific focus. So if your expertise is limited on the issue, let them know right away. And I think Megan touched on this as well. You know, if you can offer and say, hey, I don't know about this, but you can ask so-and-so. I know someone who you can call. And that's extremely helpful. And also when you do the interview, I think Yusra touched on this, make your answers as succinct as possible. I know it can be hard sometimes, but I think it's extremely helpful. And I think the best sources are always the bridge. I call them bridges, and I think you can use the word connectors. But you know, people who can put me in touch with others, and I can do the same for them. I don't look at it as a one-way street. I think my job is based on building relationships and trust. And so to me, that's the most important thing, is that we have that trust going between us. And that comes from building a relationship. It might not always be possible for us to meet in person, have lunch, you know, have coffee together, but you know, we have Zoom now, thanks to the pandemic. So you know, we can still meet face to face even when we're not face to face, and that's a great thing. And I think that's how relationships are built. Social media is great. I get a lot of story ideas through social media, but I think there's nothing that beats face to face connection. And so, yeah, relationships are everything.
Yeah, I just want to say the point about, I think all three of you said, like, asking when the deadline is. That's actually in the Be Available sheet. I literally worked for a radio station. I was considering going into radio for a hot minute. And we would literally call down the list of sources, and the first person who answered was the person who was going to be on the air. So if you can, so yes, if you need to take a minute to think, you can say, what's your deadline? Oh, it's at noon? Okay, can I call you back in 15 minutes just to like get your thoughts collected and do it? Mm-hmm. Or something like that. Or it's in 3 weeks or it's in 3 months. Okay, let's schedule something. Yeah. There's a lot of difference. Do you guys have questions that you want to pose to the panel? how do you find your stories? The-
Well, I can start
yeah.
because I have an example, perfect example for that one. So we are a national team. We don't usually cover like local events, but there are always exceptions, right? Yeah. So I got a call from a very good source of mine, Reverend Chineda Goodjoin in Orange County, New Hope Presbyterian. And so she told me, well, I have this orchestra that I'm forming in my church for underprivileged kids, children of color who don't normally have the opportunity to be in their high school or middle school bands. So it's a string orchestra. And can you write something about it? We're just starting. I said, well, that doesn't seem to fit in my schedule right now, but I will connect you with the local Orange County Register reporter who will do it. So she contacted her, and she did not have the time for it. And so she came back to me and said, hey, she still didn't have the time. Do you have any other suggestions? And so I was at a point then where I had a little bit of time to do another story, so I just went out and did it. And I did video, and I did, we had a photographer come, and it was a really wonderful story that did well in the AP. So I think the way you follow up is good. If at once you hear a no, don't give up, and also ask, just as I would ask you, hey, do you have any other source that I can go to for a quote or for comments? You should feel free to ask the reporter, hey, do you know anyone I can go to get this information out?
And how did you frame that story? I'm curious for an AP national, international audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had to expand it out a little bit more. So I did talk to folks around the country about how they approach this issue, and there are nonprofits that do this work with on an international level as well. So I got their comments as well about how these programs work in other parts of the country. So I could expand it out just a little bit.
So you use the sort of like three's a trend type thing. You found other places that are also doing it. So if you know of other places that are also doing something similar, and you can give that to a journalist.
And to answer the question, why is it important for a church to get involved in this? And so the issue of equity comes in, and how faith leaders can play a part, taking a leadership role on that issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yes, have.
I can sort of also expand on that a little bit. So for us, while we are local, it's sort of, they always look for like broad Southern California stories. But one thing that I think helps, so we sort of created this model as to what makes a good LA story, and I sort of tell people this, I'm like, if you're pitching us, think this through, and if you can pitch in this way, it also makes my task easier to go pitch to my editors then. So one thing that we look for is connect stories. So stories of connection, of community. We've sort of done a little research that shows a lot of Southern Californians are lonely in some aspects. So if it's, again, something that, we can show there is a community for, it's sort of really undercovered. So these connect stories that can really resonate with people. So for example, the mail carrier story, we framed it as a connect story because here was a local hero that his community was sort of rallying around. So even though it was a very inherently Altadena, Pasadena story, I think it's a story that can resonate with a lot of Southern Californians because I'm sure they all have these local heroes in their community. And then another thing we look at is discover. So is it something that's not been looked at in the past? Is it something that's not really touched on in the past? Is it going to introduce Southern Californians to something new, in the area that they live in? That's kind of how the nightlife story came about. One of the executive directors at one of the mosques that I'm in touch with, and he's like, there's this event that we're doing, like a night market. It's sort of framed, on these Southeast Asian night markets. And he said something really interesting to me. He's like, I'm seeing a rise in these third culture sort of spacers that second generation Muslim Americans are looking for. They don't really necessarily find nightlife options that are typically available. They don't find that it resonates with their faith because it's usually centered around music and alcohol. And he's like, I'm seeing this rise, would you be interested? So it was this one mosque event, but then he was like, I'm noticing this trend, like, do you want to explore it further? So that was a discover story. And then another thing is navigate. We're all sort of trying to navigate, different different things in our lives. So like something like a giveaway can sort of be framed, you know, for the person or the recipient who'd find that beneficial. So it could be, you know, why do they need this? How can they go about getting it? And those can be like short stories that we can turn around really fast. If people can like reach out to us with those stuff, we find those really resonate with our audiences. So for example, with the wildfires, you know, we had so much information coming on all the resources available, but how can people go about getting those resources? So we just sit down, we break down all of that, you know, all of the jargon and say really simply, you know, if you've been affected, here's how you can apply for this funding, you know, from FEMA, or if you want like a housing voucher, here's where you can go. So really simply breaking it down for people, we find this really, really resonates with our listeners and our readers. And another one, which I would love to see, you know, more stories on this, we call it the change mode. And I think this would really work well for faith communities. This is about some change happening in the community that can be sort of replicated, you know, among other communities. We rarely see this, and we rarely see this type of stories. But you know, if you know of a change maker in your community, and it can be something they've done that is really small, but that's something that can be replicated in another neighborhood, always reach out with those type of stories. I think this is on our website as well. So navigate, discover, connect, and change. That's what makes a good LA story. So if you're reaching out to us.
Take notes on that. That's good. Because I think that resonates with a lot of publications too.
Yeah.
Because we all have like local heroes and change makers in our congregation.
Mm-hmm. And nobody knows about those people, right? So.
I wanted to go last because mine's not as exciting. Since it's just like the way that broadcast and digital shows kind of how we at PBS function them. They're usually grants-based. Usually it's like a task like, can you make us an art-based series? And normally what we do is that we have sort of, well, I'll give you actually like an example. Our recent initiative is called America's Civic Spark. Please don't mention this. I don't think that's the final title in any way. It's still in development. It's only between us. Where we are looking to do local community stories that showcase folks in the way that they are engaging in their communities. When the wildfires happened, we changed our minds and thought, you know, we would be remiss to not cover the folks who are helping out during the wildfires. And the way we did it was by collaborating with Soraya and the rest of the CAV, the Community Advisory Board, where we have groups of different leaders and folks that, you know, have the finger on the pulse of our communities, different organizations, nonprofit organizations that we worked with before, who can kind of guide us and take us to the places that we should be looking at. And then at the same time, we also even published, we created a newsletter, or essentially a button on our website that said like, hey, I have a community story I want to talk about. And you could click on it, put your email, and tell us what the story is, and then we would read it and be like, is this good? We'll go and find you and talk to you. So it can all kind of, for us, it's like based on the grant and the needs of the grant. So we don't necessarily go, like for us, since we're not breaking news, we're not like looking for stories per se. We're looking for them once the objectives have been and the goals of the grant would have been stated. But that's not to say, reach out to us or tweet at us, hit us up on Instagram, you know, whatever, wherever your medium is. There might be something. We might be in the middle of a grant that tells us, like, oh, we should cover stories of leaders across religious leaders across Southern California, and we need somebody. You know, and it all kind of is. It's very spontaneous on our end, kind of thing.
Megan, can I just add one thing on what makes a good source? One thing I think I get asked, and I'm sure you two can relate as well, is people always ask us to share questions beforehand, and I'm always hesitant to do that, to share questions beforehand, and I'm always hesitant to do that, and I think it's because then it becomes very scripted, whereas I like a free-flowing conversation, so it can sort of be something you said, and then from that we can like tug at something and like pull a thread. But I feel like when you have questions beforehand, you're only prepared to speak on that, like what you've prepared for. So I like to sort of keep it like a conversation, and I'm sure,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a footnote to add on
Yeah.
that. I agree.
Yeah.
But I've covered stories where in communities where people have a right to be concerned about what your intentions are, especially the Native American community, where they've suffered a lot of hurt and trauma in the past and have been burned by media as well. So in such cases, what I do is I do send them a summary of what my intentions are, what I hope to focus. I make it clear to them that this is not the final angle of the story. I would not know that until I complete reporting on the story. But honestly, this is what my intentions are. And these are some of the questions I plan to ask you. But I will be asking follow-up questions, and the course of our conversation could change as we talk to one another. So I make those things clear. And also on the subject of quotes, letting others review your work. I have done that because especially in these types of stories where the information is sensitive, I want it to be accurate as well. So I send them some quotes or some context to how their quotes will be used, with the little footnote that hey, please don't edit my work.
Yeah.
This is so you can check this for accuracy, and please don't use it to backtrack on anything you said or to edit me. And I'm honesty, right? Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say.
Honestly, to add to that, I was a magazine editor, and we would do expert interviews for hours, and then we would send them the edited transcript because we were editing pretty heavily. It was hours into a couple pages. But that case, we always said the same thing. This is for accuracy, not for language or anything like that, not to make yourself sound more scholarly, because we actually want it to be conversational and approachable for the reader.
To be honest, I don't know anyone in my circle who would do that. That is not to say, I can say with 100% certainty that no one's ever going to do that. I mean, journalism is like any other field, right? I mean, there's all kinds of people in journalism, just as there's all kinds of people in medicine and teaching, whatever. But I think by asking the journalist before you proceed about their intentions and what they plan to do with this information, and by stating your goal clearly, what you hope to accomplish by getting the story out, I think you can minimize the chances of that happening, hopefully.
Yes, one of the reporters I spoke to before I received my pardon, I asked her if I could see like the final print and all that. Oh, she's like, sorry, we don't do that. However, I want you to know it's friendly. So it's not enough.
Okay, so what you can do going forward is you can ask the reporter before you give them the interview, will I have a chance to see my quotes, or will you run them by me? Will you read them back to me with the context, just so I know you're using them correctly? If they say no, then that could be, you could take that as a red flag.
Yeah.
That someone who would not do that might have, nefarious or other intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like our company policy is not to share the story, but I will call up, especially if somebody has reservations about how something that they said can be misconstrued, and I would read the story and read the quotes that I'm using. So that way we're sort of on the same page. And I'll say, like, kind of to Deepa's point, I think journalism is also an industry of trust. Like, read a reporter's prior work, see the connections that they've built, the relationships that they've built. I'm sure some of your sources from the Orange County Register followed you to the AP, and it was the same for me, because we've worked together in the past, and I've been very forthcoming. They sort of still come back to me, they'll pitch stories, and they also come and ask me, they're like, hey, this reporter reached out, is it okay if I talk to them? Like, what do you know about them? And I always say, read a reporter's prior work, and it's very easy to sort of check reputations because of things like Twitter and stuff. Check around, ask around. I've had faith leaders come and ask me, like, this reporter reached out to me, do you think it'll be, okay for me to speak with them, or can they misconstrue my words? And I think now with religion, sometimes with faith leaders, like, there's such a misconception When you say, and I get that a lot because I'm obviously a person of faith, so I think people always sort of, it's very easy for people to sort of, misrepresent you, to paint you in sort of a certain light. So I think it's just always doing your due diligence. It's okay to also turn down a reporter. There are places I wouldn't go work at. It's the same, it sort of goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly could not have spoken better. It's establishing trust. I can only speak about myself. I don't really have any colleagues or anything that I can immediately imagine that are coming with any sort of nefarious agendas or anything like that. Yeah, to protect yourself, as my colleagues have stated, always ask all the questions beforehand that to see if this is the person that you trust to carry your story, and and on my end, for me, it's the constant state of making sure that I'm telling the correct story and I'm telling in a way that is not, I don't know, that my personal ethics or anything like that. It's just, I wouldn't think of that type of journalism as the thing that I would ever think of doing. And also, PBS would forbid that there's an ethical journalism wall, especially when it comes from PBS, that we're not allowed to take that side of that. That not to say it doesn't happen. I'm sure, there's one PBS NewsHour that may be a little more controversial than others, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's only on my end.
And if it does happen, always reach out to the editors. I know this happened in another publication where this was during the encampments, and a student protester said something, it was misconstrued, and I know that they escalated it to the publication's editors. Yeah.
And we've taken down episodes and re-edited them and put them back on.
I think for me it's been fairly, I wouldn't say easy, but it's been organic in a way. I do look at social media, but not too much. I still look at the real world more. I have gotten great stories, faith stories out of social media. I'll give you an example. There was a pastor who was on TikTok, Kevin Wilson. He's South Asian.
Sri Lankan.
Sri Lankan. Chai pastor, right? He became famous on TikTok for making tea on TikTok. So he would have all these videos, totally fun, right? And he was a youth pastor, and I interviewed him during COVID and wrote a profile about him. And that kind of came out into the real world out of TikTok, because a literary agent who follows me on social media, she read his story and she asked, well, can I have Kevin's contact, because I think this might be a book. And so she contacted him, and his book just came out last year. So I think there are kind of these.
Did it come out last year?
It came out last year, and it was wonderful. He sent me a copy. But I think the two worlds are not like watertight. You know what I mean? There are pathways to and fro, and there are ways in which it can all be like collegial and workable. But we have to find those ways.
And I'll just say, for me, I embrace social media. When I'm out at reporting, I make content for social media. I'll ping our team, and I'm like, okay, we can turn this into a reel, because I think it makes the news more accessible to a wider audience. If you sort of look at data, you see that young people aren't consuming news as much as, say, a baby boomer or other demographics. This is such a great way to sort of get the news out to, young people. This is their world. They're going to sort of inherit this, and I think they should know sort of what's going on. So if you can break down a complex story into a social media reel, I welcome that. I love producing our videos for social media as well. And I think it's the same way. I think there can sort of be overlap. And what I always tell people, at least in the Muslim community in Southern California, there's a deep, deep mistrust of the media, rightfully so. But people will still talk to me, and then they'll ask me, they're like, okay, so you work, we'll read your stories, but we're not going to read anybody else's. I saw this on Instagram, and it contradicted what this publication said. And what I always tell people, I'm like, use that same critical, thinking hat that you would use with the media. also with social media influencers, because I think everybody has an agenda. So just the way you would be critical of the media, be critical of social media, but I think there is room for both to coexist. And you can sort of consume both forms of media. I do that. I get a lot of the news, from social media, but I'm also very critical of it, the way I would be even of mainstream media. And I think that should just be the case across the board. If you can't see somebody's brain, do not trust it.
Yeah, I have a similar sentiment to it. I think also to maybe this is too overly. This is my own take. I don't think there's media anymore. I think there's just like what we consume as
True.
There's a great book by Yuval Noah Harari called Nexus. It's like it talks about the massive shifts between technologies of as we go into different parts with media. You can bring it back all the way to the printing press and how that impacted not just culture, even the structures of religion, and completely reimagined, what was once a single church into a multitude of different churches. Huge cultural shift is that sort of thing. And I think like we're in it right now, and there are no straight answers of like, oh yeah, now everything's going to become like all media is just going to become TikTok, or like all media is going to be a 10-minute long YouTube.
Like the goal, I guess, at one point was to make the newspaper.
Yeah, yeah.
Get in the article you made.
Yeah.
And now is you can post your own reel, and if it gets to the right person, they share it. You go viral that way.
Yeah,
So,
and now we're competing against a human attention, millions and millions and millions of people that like are creating sometimes good content, sometimes not good content. PBS were the sort of, I was saying earlier, that we're the vegetables of content, like this is good for you, hopefully, and that there's like a whole institution here that's trying to educate you and give you like good context, and that will make you a better citizen. I don't know if there's like a straight, I think there's like ways to like roll with it, and I think, PBS has a side called PBS Digital Studios, which I think I've been really thinking about this a lot. They've been around for about 12 years, and they've been creating digital-only content, like direct-to-digital content, for a long time. And yeah, they're thinking about ways of like, how do you get people's attention to get them to watch something interesting that like might be better for them than say like, like two prank YouTubers boxing each other in like the street, something like that. Like, and there's ways to do it. There's ways of thinking about how to reach folks, and it's a way. And sorry, now I've gone too far off. But it's a way of thinking about like the people that you want to talk to. What do you think they'll be interested in? What are the things that will inspire them? And then try to make something that touches on that curiosity, that creativity, that interest, and that intelligence. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions.
I think it's also finding partners and media and different types of media. So like thinking about Yusra is doing the LA stories. Deepa's got an international beat, really. You've got a documentary long-term form looking bigger picture. And then there's also like thinking about the LA Sentinel. Is that better than the LA Times because you're going to reach a very targeted audience of who you want to reach? Or is it the LA Times that you want to sort of speak into that, whatever is happeing there? And I think there's a lot of shifts going on, and we don't know where some of these newspapers and publications who are going through large shifts and are going and what they're doing. I do know that there's a lot of individual quality journalists, Annenberg grads at all of these publications. And you can find individuals, but they all work within a larger system, and you have to be aware of that.
I'm very old-fashioned. I love being on the ground, and I think that's the best way to find stories. Just going into a community. So for example, I cover Orange County. I try to go out at least 2 times a week, set up meetings, sit in a cafe, observe my surroundings. I think nothing beats that. Just sort of really meeting people where they're at in their communities. I live in the South Bay, and the Rancho Palos Verdes landslide has become one of our big, it draws in a lot of our viewers and, our listeners and readers. But I think it's because I'm walking those streets, I'm talking to people, and I've sort of really gotten a flavor for that neighborhood. And I think that translates into the reporting. Like, this is one tiny city, and why is it getting so much attention in our views? And I can only sort of explain it to that. Like, because we've been on the ground over there. I've taken my colleagues out there, we've driven those roads, so we understand what's happening out there. And I think that's how one of my colleagues just not broke the story, but it's sort of been like ongoing for a year now, this investigation into a county supervisor in Orange County and the mishandling of taxpayer dollars. That came from him just showing up at Board of Supervisors meetings, looking at the contracts, looking at the votes, and just asking questions because he was on the ground. He was able to sort of meet people, make those contacts, meet sourcers who can sort of, tell him about the goings on. Honestly, that's the best way. And I think for clergy to partner with journalists, the best way is to sort of, invite them into your communities. Our food editor, I found this really fascinating. He's been a food editor for about 10 years. When Ramadan came around, he's like, Yusra, I've never experienced an iftar. And I was like, shame on the community for never inviting you to one, Because that's not on him, right? Like, this is not a community that he's familiar with. But I was like, why hasn't anybody thought to say, hey, come try an iftar with us, I think it's that. Always just invite people into your space. Don't make the space sort of work for the reporter. The reporter comes into your space, builds those relationships. And sometimes it's just, having a coffee or asking them to come, listen to a sermon or just come sit in the congregation. Maybe it won't, pan into a story immediately, but you sort of keep those, in your mind. And it becomes those like longer term stories. And I think a lot of times, I think it's great that the AP has a religion beat. A lot of publications don't have a religion specific reporter anymore. So I think it's also finding reporters who report on, so for us, for example, we have climate, the climate crisis is like a big beat for us. But I think there can be so much overlap between like faith communities and climate, immigration and faith communities. So finding those connections. Megan and I, so we both have the same mentor from USC. And when I took that class, we were traveling to Texas and we were sort of looking for, religion stories in Texas. It's a religion reporting class. And one of the stories I did out of that class was about immigration because I found a church that is literally situated on the border and just how for the last, since 1990, they've just served the community. It's not a big church. It's not one of the big ones that takes, the migrants that come in. This is a tiny church that started out of somebody's garage. And I think it's those stories, right? Like, unless they invited, and I found him on social media. So, and I think it's inviting people into your spaces.
I can speak for myself. I still read every email I get. So email is a great way to get in touch with me. And if you have a compelling story and you can send me a pitch, I will read it. And if I can do the story, I will do it. If I think someone else locally can do it, I will forward it to them. So that's still the best way with me. Yeah.
Yeah. Same. I read my emails. Yeah.
I read my emails.
I do think that's the unique thing about journalism. With zero inbox people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that also.
No, I save every email as well.
Into a folder, but try to read everything. But I think there's a difference if it's a PR pitch versus an email from a leader. That's going to make a huge difference too. Like if it's signed from you and it doesn't look like headline, here's an article that's already written type thing.
Yeah.
A personal pitch is going to be probably the most effective to most journalists.
Sure.
I think it's remembering that I remember when the person reached out to me about the mail carrier. She knew my stories. It was very personal. It was like, hey, I've read some of your reporting on this topic. I really think you're the best person to tell the story of this mail carrier, and here's why he's special to me.
So that story came to you. It wasn't.
Yeah.
What?
It was a reader,
a
listener. She's like, I'm familiar with your reporting. He's a hero in my community. I would love for you to tell his story, and I think, you'd be this is why I think you'd be the perfect person. So it was understanding, the publication, knowing the kind of stories I tell, and I think it's also the trust factor, right? Like, she was familiar with my reporting, and she's like, this is why his story is special. Like, I was like, yes, like, it hit all of the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good part. As a reader, even when you're pitching an op-ed, as a reader of this publication, I think that this is an important voice that you don't have in here yet,
Yeah.
or you don't have to do it in a critical way, but like.
No, but I think that's helpful too sometimes, right? Like, so for us, we don't accept op-eds, but I think a good place to sort of reach out would be Air Talk with like Larry Mantle. So the producers are always looking for a variety of voices for the show. So if you hear something in the community, or if you even hear them talking about a topic, calling in, because then what happens is the producers take your details and then they stay in touch with you if they feel like, this could be a source that we can use for another story segment.
Okay, I want to be cognizant of our time. It's 1 o'clock now. I hope you all come back for social media next month. And I want to thank our journalists for sharing with us and connect with them.